Hi everyone, it's Ron here at Simwad Lens. Today I'm going to walk you through the process on how to calibrate infinity on your Canon FD35 f2 SSC lens. Now it's important to understand why infinity calibration is required on a lens such as this. This lens has been converted to EF using the Simwad Edmica conversion system. Now, due to the mount being thicker than the original mount, it's now pushed the lens a little bit forward from the camera. So therefore, because of the thicker mount, infinity calibration is required because it's not reaching sharpness at infinity. Now, if you look at infinity, the marking is at this point right now. Because the mount is thicker than the original, the lens wants to go further in order to reach sharpness. So it wants to hit maybe somewhere there or here, or somewhere in this area is where we need to allow the focus barrel to turn in order to bring the lens further back, closer to the sensor. So, but the hard stop that's set on the lens is it's telling us to stop turning at this point, because when the lens was at its native FD, infinity was at this point. So what we need to do is remove this barrel and adjust the hard stop on the focus. So we want to tell the lens to stop here or somewhere in there, depending how off it is. So we need to give it half a millimeter or a millimeter, whatever it may be, extra space to allow it to reach infinity. So that's why we need to calibrate these lenses to infinity. In order to do that, we need to remove the nameplate on this lens. So using a rubber spanner, we can easily remove that. You can purchase these rubber spanners anywhere on Amazon or some hobby shop that may have it. So that comes off. Once the nameplate comes off, you'll notice that there are 4 Phillips screws that will need to be removed. So we'll remove those. Again, using a GIS screwdriver, applying firm pressure. Be careful with those screws not to lose them, because we will need them to be to reinstall once we've recalibrated the lens. It's important to note that it's impossible to know how much adjustment we need to make for each lens, because it's something that you just have to fine-tune and retest on your own. So once you make that adjustment, you'll have to put it on your camera, focus to infinity, and find the farthest point and see if it is sharp after that adjustment. If it's not sharp, you simply have to do it again. So once those 4 screws are removed, be careful not to remove the other 4 screws, which are slotted. Do not touch the slotted ones and only remove the ones with the star. So once those 4 screws are removed, we can lift this plate off. Once that plate is removed, now it reveals 3 more screws. We'll have to remove those screws. Be careful not to mix up those screws with the other four screws. Once the 3 screws are removed, we can now remove the focus barrel, and that just comes right off. Once we remove the focus barrel, now we can see exactly where the hard stop is set. So at the moment, the hard stop is set at this point. This is where the mark was for infinity. Now we want to move, we want to allow it some extra space. So we want it to go, this to go even further. So what we need to do is remove these 3 screws, or simply loosen them. And by doing so, we will allow this plate to move down a little bit and give us that extra space for focus. So in this instance, I've loosened the 3 screws. I'm not going to remove them. I'm just going to loosen them. And I'm going to move this stopper plate down ever so slightly. Let's say a millimeter. So I'm going to move it down a millimeter and I'm going to lock it. Now I've given it a millimeter more of movement. So I've allowed infinity focus to go slightly over. And I'm going to retighten it. What I'm going to do, put it at infinity. I'm going to bring this lens to my collimator, which we have, but in your case you may not have one, so you will need to put this on a camera, focus to infinity, and using false focus to test to see if it is sharp at its furthest distance. One trick that I do is to simply use a little tweezer and make a little notch or a little line to identify where I want the lens to stop at infinity. So for example, if I put this lens on a camera body and infinity comes sharp at this point, I would put a little line here. And then when I bring this lens back to my desk, taking it off the camera body, I would align that line to this stop and bring this stopper over to where the line is. That way I'm telling the lens to stop at that point and don't go any further, because that's where infinity is at. So once we've determined where infinity is at and where we want the lens to stop at infinity, by again adjusting this plate and loosening and tightening these 3 screws, we're ready to reassemble this lens. So in order to do so, again, we'll put it at infinity. That's our new stop. We get the focus barrel, find the orange marking, and we align the infinity mark with the mark that's on the lens. Try not to move anything, because if you move this back and then you realign infinity, it's going to be off target. So make sure it's at infinity and you align the marking to the infinity mark. Carefully set it down and let's reinstall the screws. So there are 3 screws that attaches the focus barrel onto the lens. Once the 3 screws are installed, we can simply test it, and that's where we can determine that that is the new hard stop for infinity. You can go ahead and retest this on a camera again to make sure. From there, we'll reinstall the ring that we took off by aligning the 4 holes. There is a pattern, so you simply keep turning until you reach the pattern that the lens requires. So once that's aligned, just simply reinstall the 4 screws. Once the 4 screws are installed and this ring is now tightened, we'll just simply rethread the nameplate. These are plastic nameplates that get threaded onto an aluminum ring, so sometimes the plastic threading may seize, so there could be instances where you just simply press down and bypass a thread or so just to get it in, and then once you ever need to remove it again, you simply just put a plier in there and just pop it out. Sometimes that's the case. And there you have it, a fully calibrated Canon FD35 f2 SSC.